companions, welcome. I thought I'd read you another story from my book, As Far as a Man Can Go, which was recently published. It's a coffee table book, and it has photographs and short stories that tell of all my wanderings into the most remote parts of the wilderness of Africa over the years. This story happened in the Kalahari in the early 2020s. I wanted to go and explore some pans I had found on Google Earth. These pans were extremely remote and not connected to any road or track. But I wanted to go and see what was going on there. I will read to you from about as far as one can go. It took 2 days of meandering along tracks, and then 3 hard days of bush bashing to get to the pan. It turned out to be a calcareous flat of some 400 acres in size. I stopped the Land Cruiser on the slight rise above, and I climbed onto the roof with my binoculars to survey it. I needed water. If I did not find any here, I would have to retrace my journey to my previous source, which was about 4 days back of really hard bush driving. That was almost unthinkable. The pan was deserted, except for a lone jackal crossing at a trot. I could not make out any sign of water, though. Well, when all else fails, keep calm and make some tea, I told myself as I got down from the cab. When it was a bit cooler, I scouted the western edge for animal tracks on foot. There were many: gemsbok, springbuck, hartebeest, brown hyena, jackal, porcupine, even leopard. None of these species were really water reliant, though. Many got their moisture from their food, and some could even metabolize water out of their body fat and protein. Just as I was about to turn back to my camp, I found some zebra tracks, and then some wildebeest. Both these species are more water dependent than the others. I quickly found a game path that led into the pan, and I followed it. It had lots of zebra and wildebeest tracks on it, and of course many others too. It led to a little hollow the size of half a tennis court, with a thin sheet of water covering its surface. The water was rather murky, but it was water. It had probably gathered there with the last rains, and it was held there by the clayish nature of the soil. It might also be fed from secret fissures from below, who knows? The edges of the hollow and the game paths converging on it were trodden to powder. Now I saw eland and lion, and even, to my surprise, a kudu spoor or two. There were elephant sign as well, but that was older, more than a week. As I stared at the grey-brown soup, I thought this was probably the only water for many miles around. These old elephant tracks probably meant that the matriarchs had sensed that this meager source was not going to be enough to sustain their huge needs, and they had led away their herds to some distant source that they held in their elephant memories. What was heartening, though, was that there was a lot of wildlife activity around the pan, and it was a good place for me to stay a while. After a few days, my water supplies really began to run low. I simply had to see if I could find some water from the pan. The water there was only a few inches deep and mud-churned, with bits of animal dung floating on the surface. I could see several dubious creatures swimming around in it, and there were probably many more of microscopic size. Of course, they thrived on the nutrition provided by the animal droppings. Near the edge of the pan, the water was too shallow to scoop from. I tried to wade in, but that was a mistake. It caused huge clouds of mud to churn up from the bottom, and it made the water totally unusable. The mud was sticky as glue. It stuck to my shoes, and to anything it touched. Wading in was really not a good idea. I found a large calcareous rock, and I managed to maneuver it into the water so that I could stand on it. Now, if I stood and balanced on one leg, I could actually reach a little bit of clean water that was just deep enough for me to scoop from. But it took more than an hour to fill a 20-liter container by patient scoops. Despite my very best efforts, dirt still got collected. At my camp, I strained it through a shirt. That removed some of the grit and the larger creatures and the bits of debris, but it did nothing to improve the color, and it was still as thick as soup. It also tasted of dung and earth. I used it to cook and to wash, but later I simply had to use some of it to drink. It was really unpleasant, it made one nauseous, but I mixed it with some of the fresh water that I still had with me, and that made it reasonably palatable. Companion, this was again confirmation of how carefully one has to plan for water when you go out into the wilderness. I hope you enjoyed this little story, and I hope you're going to join me again next week or when I have another post. Good luck to you in the meantime.